want to invite you to give us your feedback and ask any questions you may have regarding the preliminary budget for 2013. We're also going to be looking at our academic and some facility planning, which you'll hear a little bit about in the presentation. So before we get started, I thought that we might take some time to share with you some of the big picture guidance that we get as a school district as we think through how we do our resource distribution in any given year. Our goal this evening is to inform you and engage you around the preliminary budget as we formulate for the school community how we're going to distribute our resources for the upcoming school year. Our school district approved a strategic plan in 2009 based on a vision that has been the long-standing vision for the district. We want to be a nationally recognized district that instills a passion for lifelong learning in for our kids. And underneath that, which is new to the strategic plan, were 4 key goals that the board highlighted for us to kind of organize all of our work underneath. The first is around ensuring that students perform at or above grade level, and that's basically looking at our state performance measures. They wanted to ensure that we didn't just close, but actually eliminated achievement gaps among student groups, and there are many different ways that we can look at that. There are various demographic points that we compare, and all those things are outlined in the strategic plan. The board also wants to ensure that in addition to graduating more kids and ensuring that we reduce the number of dropouts, but that we're actually preparing kids for college, career, and life after graduation from high school. So you'll hear us talking a lot in partnership with, for example, our Chamber of Commerce about what that actually looks like and how do we measure in significant ways. Not only did we do our job to ensure that kids graduate on time, but do we actually have them prepared to be successful after they graduate. And then in addition to meeting and exceeding our state accountability standards, the district is also held accountable for federal expectations under No Child Left Behind. And there's a lot of debate around what the out years are going to look like for accountability standards in this area, but we know that, that they aren't necessarily going away. And if it's not these standards, they're going to be a different set that will help guide our country about the expectations from the federal government. In our strategic plan, there's a specific strategy related to kind of what led the rethinking of how we aligned our resources to accomplish the priorities in the strategic plan, but doing it within a balanced budget. And I don't have to tell you, parents and community members and teachers and other staff members that are here, that this is a really trying time in Texas, all across the state for every ISD. And as a result, Austin is in a particularly unique situation, which you're going to hear about from the Chief Financial Officer. And by that I mean we have some very specific things that are unique to our district that makes our financial burden just a little heavier than everyone else's. So you're going to hear us talk about things like a Robin Hood funding methodology. You're going to hear about, for us, things like Social Security and some other things that come straight off the top of our resources before we even get to paying out dollars to schools so they can run our academic programming for the demographics that we have. And within that strategy, there was a very specific action step. And just to be clear, what the board has said to us is that academics needs to be the driver for everything we do. And then we need to have supporting plans, and for example, in this case, a facility master plan. You'll often hear us talk about technology plans, the library plan. We have so many different levels of additional plans that undergird the work of our academic expectations. And so in addition to all of these things, while we're being academically driven, we're balancing that with the the realities of our operational life. And that's money, that's infrastructure, that's a lot of other things that, that we have to have that support our academic direction, but often come with cost of their own that we have to manage in any particular year. And that's why the board each year, yes, uses the vision and mission, and yes, has a standing set of goals, but each year they set for us priorities to focus our attention, and that changes year to year based on what's really happening in the district. So this school year, there are actually 4 priorities that we're living and breathing today. For 12-13, the board has given us more guidance and kind of honed their approach toward the kind of priorities they want to see us ensure get funded within our budget. The first one on the far left is whole child, every child, and that's the concept of us getting out of this tax sort of state accountability-focused mindset and getting more into the development of the entire student, which means we're going to be looking at things like arts and athletics and other extracurricular programming that would be supportive to a student that may or may not be directly associated with the state assessment. It was tax, and now we're transitioning to STAR, but we had kind of gotten ourselves in this state in a test prep mindset as sort of the driver for what we were doing, and we want to change that. The next piece is around college, a college-ready culture, and that is around us ensuring that we're expanding and enhancing our academic programs so that our students are getting access to the rigor they need so that when they do graduate from high school, research shows with high rigor and quality programming, they're much more likely, not only that will they go to college, but that they will stay in college and finish within 4 years. The board is continuing with the purple one, the rich portfolio of options. That's one that we had this school year that they are continuing to have as part of their priorities. And that's focused on the district actually establishing not only new programming for individual schools where necessary, but that we're actually challenging ourselves around new delivery models on how we do our business. So we're rethinking everything from how we've been offering transportation, and our operations officer can be here to talk about those things. How do we get a more efficient, route system, to the quality of food that we're serving so that it's healthier and more organic and has less fat, saturated fat content for students. So there's all sorts of things that we can look at around new delivery models to ensure that we promote graduation rates and ensure that our kids are getting higher achievement gains because of those investments. Human capital is another area, and that's largely because we are seeing that, our ability to recruit, retain, promote, and reward our staff is a challenge every year. We are in a pretty competitive region. We are an urban district that's a pretty expensive city to live in, surrounded by regional communities that are suburban in nature, and they often have more resources than a district like ours. And therefore, they can do things for their staff that AISD can't do in sometimes ACES to ACES. So how do we really rethink our human capital strategy to ensure that we're keeping the very best people as leaders and teachers in our schools? And then finally, systems improvement systems improvement throughout the district. And that's where we're looking at everything from how do we get information to teachers? How do we get better information about students in real time so that formative assessment and data about kids can be integrated every day up to the hour and the minute so that, our staff have what they need to be able to do their jobs. We're also looking at improvements in systems around technology and other rapidly rapidly evolving pieces to the system that makes running a big organization like AISD, a billion-dollar organization, hard to do when you don't have smart, high-quality systems in place. Our first community budget conversation took place on April 3rd at Reagan High School. We are doing this tonight. I have an all-staff meeting tomorrow night, and all through the fall and into the board's early actions around staffing formulas and those sorts of things earlier in this calendar year are all things that we've been doing leading up to a board action in June of 2012. So the latest we can take action on our budgets is actually August. Last year we waited to the end of August. Can anybody guess why we wanted to wait until August and we didn't trigger our budget action in June? You can just scream it out. Yes, the legislature was still in session and they decided to go into the summer. So when things like that are happening, we have a little cushion, but this year the board is contemplating and is scheduled to take action in June. So for those of you who might have thought we might be in August again, we're actually moving it back to a regular schedule of June. And then after that June 11th work session where we talk about it, it's the regular scheduled meeting in June where the board on the 18th will take that action. There's going to be a second public hearing regarding the budget and the tax rate that we'll do in advance of the action in case there's more commentary from the public where people may be interested in other areas of the budget. So when you break things out, there's like historic tax exemptions and the tax rate itself, and then there's the budget. So these pieces, different people at different times may be interested in coming and talking and asking more questions about that.
There's a lot of details that I'll cover, and they're pretty hardcore financial information, but I've tried to simplify it as much as I could to give you sort of a broad understanding of our financial issues, and more importantly, so that you can be engaged and participate in our budgeting process. And as we gear up for the next legislative session, it's always helpful to have a community that's well informed and educated about the specific financial issues that affect Austin. So, but before I get started on sort of the nuts and bolts, I'd like to start with sort of the, one of the good things that we're doing and that's Austin is very well managed financially. The board has exercised a lot of prudence and discipline over the years. We're in a good financial position. We have some of the strongest ratings that a school district can earn. We have a AAA rating. We're one of 7 districts that has that high distinction in the state. We continue to get accolades, and we've got a superior rating in the state's financial accountability system. We get awards for, we got the Comptroller Award for budget transparency and information. So if you go to our website, anything that you find here tonight, as well as other supplemental documents and schedules that tell you how we spend our dollars to the detail by school level, by department, by function, by program, all of those schedules and information is on our website so that you can stay constantly informed about our budget. We win national awards from the Government Finance Officers Association as well as our Association for School Business Officials for both budgeting and financial reporting. So those are 2 different criteria measures that you have to meet. Not only budgeting, but how do you go in and report out on how you actually spent the money and who got what. So those are all great things that that indicate that the district is well managed and that this community has really circled around and supported the board in making some of those hard decisions to balance this budget, despite the fact that we've been experiencing dwindling revenue and resources over the last few years. So just to give you an overview of where we're coming from, I wanted to talk about a little bit of a history on the state financial challenges that the district has been facing in recent years. So in 2007, right, the legislative session essentially froze school district money to 2005-2006 levels. So imagine freezing your budget to a budget of 6 years ago, where you had to absorb inflation, costs, new monies for fuel, food, labor, all about what was happening 6 years ago. So our purchasing power has dwindled over time. And so for us, that means that we've absorbed about $18 to $20 million a year because that legislative action basically capped us at a revenue per WADA level of 6 years ago. In 2009, the legislative session gave us an increase into the amount of dollars that we get on a per pupil basis, but said we had to spend it on salaries. So it basically gave us $12 million in additional revenue, but said you had to spend it on something that cost the district $13 million. So we had to find that extra million and absorb that $20 million in annual inflation, since the funding formula doesn't cover us for inflation. And then the last legislative session, we all know about that. That was unprecedented cuts for school districts across the state. For the first time in 60 years, the legislature failed to fund public education. We saw a $5.3 billion cut to public education. And so Austin, as a result of that cut, we lost about $35.6 million in the current year. We had to cut. We implemented a massive reduction in force. And for FY13 budget, our revenue assumes that we are losing another $25 million on top of that. Now, the SB1 legislation that's currently in law suggests that they're going to eliminate additional state aid for tax release by the time 2018. And additional state aid for tax relief is what the deal was in 2005, 2006 that capped us at those revenue levels. So if they eliminate that, that means Austin will lose probably will have to cut another $100 million out of its budget by 2018. So when you roll that out, you're looking at about $30 million worth of additional cuts on top of the ones that we've already absorbed in this last 2 fiscal years. So the condition worsens for Austin because we're considered one of those property wealthy districts, and we receive a fairly large benefit from that deal that was struck in 2005, 2006 when property tax relief was put into the system. Because at that point in time, Austin taxpayers taxed its community at $1.50, one of the highest levels of tax rate. So it said, you know what, if you're taxing yourself at those high levels, we're going to freeze you to those revenue levels from 2000, 2005, 2006. Well, the capacity over that freeze has diminished over time, and now the legislator has put in legislation to effectively take that away in the future by 2018. So as a result of these challenges in the fiscal year, we have been austerity planning for the last 3 years. So we've implemented about $77 million worth of strategies to avoid costs, reduce budgets, realize revenue over the last 3 years. So we've been as efficient as possible. We're not like other taxing jurisdictions who had capacity to increase their tax rate to keep to stay level with its revenue or cost needs or inflationary factors. We have had to be more efficient than many of our counterparts across the state as a result, as a necessity as a result of the cutting. So going into 2013, we already starting with sort of reduced revenue of close to $56 million. We lost federal monies. We had one-time stimulus dollars that we lost this current year. We're scheduled to lose another $13.8 million in one-time federal EduJobs money that we utilized to support our pre-K programming this year and to continue to support our additional planning periods. Our staff compensation has been frozen for 2 years. Unlike many of our regional counterparts, they've been frozen for sort of 1 year only, so the first year of this legislative cut. We've been frozen for 2 years, so we're seeing a widening disparity in terms of our teacher salary when you compare us to our regional counterparts. So when you look at Pflugerville, Round Rock, our more direct competitors, you'll see that their salaries are about 3.6% higher than our teacher salaries. And when you look at us to our urban counterparts, they're almost nearly 11.3% behind when you take out FICA. Now, Austin is a unique district. We're one of a handful of districts who participates in the Social Security program. And we cannot get out of it. I get asked all the time, why don't we just get out? Feds won't let you out of Social Security. It would take an act of Congress to relieve us from the Social Security program. So once you're in it for life. And that's at about $33 million worth of expenditures that Austin ISD experiences that probably the other 1,400 districts across the state don't experience. So off the top, we're coming at a disadvantage. And so just to give you an overview of the state's funding formula, it's sort of a two-tier system. I talked about it. One foundation piece is sort of a foundational piece where you get a base amount per pupil, and they add weights factors depending upon the characteristics of that student, depending if they're economically disadvantaged, if they're special ed, if they're bilingual. And then you have the target revenue system that basically brings you up or drags you back down to that revenue per WADA amount that was agreed upon in 2000, 2005, 2006. So essentially, if property tax values go up, right, that's our main source of revenue for the district, Austin ISD gets no benefit to that because we only get the amount of revenue per WADA that was agreed to in 2005, 2006. The rest of any excess collection goes to the state so the state can redistribute it under its recapture system. So the only way that we can actually increase our revenue for Austin ISD is to increase our average daily attendance rate or to increase the property tax rate. And again, so it creates an inverse relationship. If our collections go down, the state picks it back up to hold us to that level. Conversely, if tax collections increase, the state gets to keep that additional revenue. The recapture system, how many of you all know what recapture or Robin Hood is? So that was put in place by the state. It's a wealth redistributing model that the state utilizes to take from tax collections from property wealthy district, and it redistributes that revenue to other districts across the state that are considered property poor. And Austin is considered property wealthy. So our money goes back in. Over the last, since it's 2001, we've paid in about $1.6 billion into the program. So the system, it probably won't go away anytime soon because the state is highly dependent upon the revenue that we send in to meet its requirement under the state funding formula system. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about what's in the preliminary budget. It's almost nearly $1 billion budget, as Dr. Karstafen mentioned. The bottom line of the budget doesn't go up as much as for next year as it over the current year. We're only talking about under 1% increase at the bottom line when you look at all funds, general, food, and debt. The general fund budget is going to go up $355,000, but we are making some big assumptions on the revenue side. We already assumed for the revenue losses for the state and the feds. We're assuming about moderate growth in the rate of our enrollment and average daily attendance for next year. Our tax collection, and as well as the tax rate, we're assuming the same tax rate for next year. So all of this sort of rolls into our budget assumption for next year. On the expenditure side, we've built in capacity to support some of the approved annual academic facility recommendations that the board approved in December, which my colleague will go through a little later in the presentation. It includes budgetary costs to support some of that continued strategic plan initiatives that we put into place in previous years, and also baseline increases. We have about $11.1 million in needs associated just to maintain continuity of operation for employee health care plans, electricity, fuel, all of those daily costs that go into running and maintaining the system. It's built into the baseline budget. Just as an overview, the general fund is about 74% of our budget. The recapture or Robin Hood constitutes about 12% of the overall budget that Austin ISD has. The total net revenue to the district is expected to go down about nearly 2%, while total expenses will increase about close to 3%. So this necessity requires us to go into our reserves to actually fund our expenditure budget since we are going to experience a decline in our revenue. So we're basically posturing to go into our reserves of about $32.5 million in order to sustain expenditures for next year because we've made a decision not to implement additional reductions because we feel that, at this point in time, we built capacity in our reserves so that we could have a year to sort of catch our breath and stabilize. So we knew that we had to implement a RIF last fiscal year. We implemented it fully. We didn't do what other districts do and hired people back once we got new revenue. We took that revenue, we banked it, we built up our reserves to allow us some time and capacity to hold the line this year, stabilize staff, and utilize our reserves for FY13. And so, again, our revenue, despite the declines, we'll be able to access our reserves to help sustain our expenditure budgets for next year. So local represents about 82% of all the sources of our revenue. You can see the state piece really constitutes only about 15% of all the revenue we receive. And even that is sort of a misnomer because most of our budget comes from actual local tax collections. Here you can see the relationship between enrollment, average daily attendance, and weighted average daily attendance. So you hear us say, make sure students are in class, they're counted at 10 o'clock, so that it increases our average daily attendance. It doesn't help us if students are enrolled. They have to attend classes. That's how we get credit under the state's formula. And if those students tend to have one of the weighting characteristics, we get even more money for those students. So for us, attendance is king, not necessarily enrollment. And so this year, we've seen about 0.25% of our enrollment rates. We've assumed that in the budget, and it's translated into an additional about $2.8 million in revenue for us for next year. So our efforts are working, but we definitely want to increase that revenue over time. Property tax values are going up, but again, as I said, property tax values increases don't necessarily benefit the school district, but it is a good sign of the local economy that it's rebounding and that good things are happening within the Austin region. The district, unlike any other taxing jurisdiction, has a limit on the tax rate. It can only go up to $1.17 based upon the state's current funding formula law, as well as and also it must go to voters to increase the tax rate beyond $1.06. And so this is sort of the breakout between, the district assesses two tax rates. One is for the INS, which supports the debt service budget, which is basically debt approved by voters as part of the bond program. And then the M&O tax rate, which supports district operations. So those are the two different tax rates that are assessed to you every year on your bill. This shows you on the M&O tax rate, this shows you the $1.17, and you hear a lot of people talk about the compressed rate, the golden pennies, the silver pennies, and the copper pennies. And basically, this is sort of the breakdown of the structure. Silver pennies, which was sort of the last piece where it's not subject to recapture. So the district is at $1.079. So if we wanted to increase our tax rate, it really would be a copper penny. So that means that we have to have voter approval, and it's subject to recapture. But even despite the fact that we are at that tax rate, we have the second overall lowest tax rate in the school districts in Central Texas. So our property tax rate is fairly low when you look at our school district counterparts. But before the actual law change, before the state put in property tax relief, we were at $1.50. So you can see that Austin voters approved a higher tax rate than we are today. It's about 28% lower than it was at that time when the tax rate was at $1.50. We know that the property tax bill, we constitute about 53% of that, so we are the largest portion of your bill. So we're always mindful of our tax rates and the impacts that it has on our local taxpayers. So just to give you a breakdown of the budget from a functional perspective, 64% of our budget is spent on direct instruction. And you can see the next largest area of our operating budget is spent on facilities, plant, maintenance, security, and data. So you can see the biggest pieces of our pie is on instruction. The other big piece is on our plant and data and maintenance. And you can see general administration, about 2.5% of the budget, which is fairly low when you look at ourselves. And despite popular belief, it's fairly low when you look at our other counterparts. So this is our budget by object. We know that we're about 87% people. Most of our monies are spent on salary and people. So when we have to reduce our budget, we're very limited in what we can do without affecting direct staff or salaries in terms of balancing. So the breakdown of our budget, this sort of shows you how the budget proposal shakes out in terms of what the major components of it are. Again, a large component is going to satisfy baseline costs to maintain continuity of operations. We have monies in there to support contractual needs, potential AFRs, and other strategic plan investments. And so when you add all those up, considering the fact that we have less revenue, we're looking at going into our reserves of about $32.5 million. And our reserves, despite the fact that this year would be the first year that we've got one of the highest levels that we've seen in our reserves. So we deliberately built up our reserves over time to be able to apply them for next FY13. So we've got strong fund balance, and we strategically have been sort of planning around utilizing fund balance as a strategy. And our forward fiscal year planning will include repayment of our fund balance because we don't want to see it dwindle. And then I want to briefly talk to you about human capital. Again, I mentioned to you the widening disparity in our teacher salaries when you look at us in comparison to our regional counterparts. But we know that this is one of the biggest issues that we have to tackle since our salaries have been frozen for our teachers for 2 years. And so we built into the budget a one-time payment, the equivalent of a 3% increase for all employees. It will cost the district about $14.2 million to make that one-time payment that we'll be funding out of our reserves initially. However, the payment could be sustained if we were able to if voters actually ratified a possible tax rate increase to support that compensation increase over time. So it's a one-time payment unless we have sustainable revenue that would be authorized by voters through a tax rate increase. But we have built into some way to address compensation for our staff into the budget. Again, Social Security costs us about $33 million. We're about one of 20 districts that have to pay that, and there is no way that we can get out of it. I mean, I've appealed to Congress and everybody that I possibly could, and it's not a reasonable expectation anywhere in the near future, but it is a $33 million cost. And so, depending on where you're at in your career, Social Security could be a good thing, and so it really just is really individualized, but we're trying to sort of shore up that disparity. I wanted to give you some little information about going out for a tax ratification election, every penny that's available to us and what it would generate in terms of additional revenue. So you can see if we went out for the full 9 pennies available to us, right, we're $1.79, the maximum by law is $1.17, we would only actually get about $34 million in revenue. And so a 4-cent increase, we're looking at about an additional $15.6 million in revenue. So you can see that the revenue opportunities to the district are fairly constrained, but a tax rate increase would provide some revenue, but it doesn't necessarily generate the kind of revenue that you would necessarily think. When the city talks about its generation, when it talks about the bond, it's not necessarily, that revenue is not necessarily subject to the kinds of state law limitations that our pennies are. And so I just want to give you, our planning ahead. We're constantly planning for our conducting financial planning. We have a multi-year financial plan. It includes sort of continuing to build up our reserves, planning for the worst, unfortunately. We know I was cautiously optimistic about the next legislative session, thinking that maybe we could get by with no more cuts, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. Every day, what we hear back from the legislator continues to worsen, especially for Austin, considering the fact that we have that ASATR language in legislation. Even though tax values are growing, we don't really benefit, so we are looking to increase our average daily attendance, looking at alternative options to generate revenue, looking for a fundraising campaign that we're hoping to launch on our website so that we can continue to have and partner with our local communities to support the school district's endeavors for some of those options that are strategic priorities that the superintendent talked about.
My name's Ron Hill. I'm a taxpayer in Austin. All 3 of my children graduated from this high school. I was PTA president for 3 different schools and supported every bond issue. And that's all a preliminary that I'm a great supporter of Austin schools. But I did vote against the last tax increase, and I probably will vote against this one on one issue, and that is Austin ISD's health care plan. It's refused to get into the state plan, and in consequence has one of the most expensive health care plans in the state and contributes between $1,500 to $2,400 annually to each employee enrolled in the health care plan. The efficiency study said that Austin ISD would save $11 million if it got into the state plan, which Dallas and Fort Worth and 93% of districts are a part of. I noticed on page 7 you're talking about total compensation. And I would submit that on pages 26, those two charts do not reflect the almost $440 or so the district is contributing to each employee enrolled in the health care plan. Most districts in Central Texas contribute between $225 to $275 on the state plan. So my question is, does this chart show the total compensation including the health care contribution, which is in the top 2.5% in the state of the 1,400 districts?
Great. And so, Nicole, can you answer the first question? And then while she's preparing for that, I do want to let you know that we have a whole committee of people, external, our business community, internal, our teacher associations, and we've been working on health care and health and the cost of health care, which is rapidly increasing, to a very, I think, deliberate end that has saved the district, what was it, $9 million?
$13 million.
$13 million in the transition since, we started with this administration. The other piece is that we have looked at the state plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we found that we would not save as much money as we would doing what we're doing now, which is self-insurance.
Right. At the point in time, you're referring to the efficiency study, and at that point in time, yes, there could have been some savings, but since then, we've transitioned to a self-insured plan, and we've implemented plan adjustments, and so we've realized about $13 million worth in savings, and today, if you benchmark us against comparable state plans, it would actually cost the district to join the TRS plan about anywhere from $5 to $6 million. So once you're into the state's plan, you're locked into there. You don't have any opportunity to make adjustments. The state has gone up on its premiums every year, and a lot of school districts are struggling to maintain those premium increases. And so if you benchmark our current plans against the proposed increases in the state, it would actually cost the district more, considering the fact that we've transitioned out of that old plan that you're referencing from the efficiency study.
I think the premise needs to be looked at, though, because under a self-funded program, you're assuming all the risks. Where under the TRS Active Care, the state and 400,000 lives enrolled in that program are assuming the risk of the claims. So all I see about $4.8 million increase in health care funding, if I'm reading this correctly.
Do you have the page
And
talking about?
I'm going to predict that those costs will continue. I just wanted to make that question that it should really be looked at again, especially that $450 or $440 contribution to each employee. That needs to be part of the total compensation. It needs to be included on that because Austin would appear to be at the top of the compensation list, not 9th or 10th. And when I heard the campaign last time that teachers are underpaid in Austin, I questioned that if you factor in that health care contribution.
And you are correct. If we factor in the compensation for the actually FICA. Now, the health plan I'd have to go back and do some checking on in terms of where we would rank out if we added the health care plan to that. I don't have that in front of me, but I definitely don't necessarily think that it would result in the same rankings that you've had historically, because we do know that the health care plans of our counterparts have gone up considerably, and we've reduced our health care costs. So I would like to come back with you on where we would rank if we considered the base compensation with the health care, because our findings...
I've already looked at it, believe me, and Austin ranks at the top with that health care contribution.
Are you looking, what are you referencing when you're, I'm sorry, your source document?
Actually, what I'm looking at is the TSTA survey that comes out each year, which ranks all the districts in the state as far as their health care contribution. And what I found also is that Austin, with its employee and family cost, there's more out-of-pocket cost for an employee with family than there is under the state plan, despite the fact that Austin pays in the top 2.5% in the state of the 1,400 districts on that contribution. I've also monitored Austin Central Texas compensation surveys in the last 12 years. Austin, I've watched their salaries and comparable to other districts go down, but I've watched those health care contributions go up. I think there is there's an impact there.
Well, you're probably looking at old data because we're just experiencing 1 year of our runoff from our self-insured plans. I'm pretty sure there's probably a lag in that data. Going forward, when they release that information, you should see the results of our premium as a result of our self-insurance plan, so you'll see those rates go down.
And I really do feel the teachers in Austin need to have pay raises, especially at the 5, 10, 15 years. That's what's going to retain. And what I would recommend is not being so focused on starting salaries, hiring inexperienced teachers, but do a 5-year plan to get those 5, 10, 15-year steps in line with other districts. And take into account that health care contribution. That is part of the budget. And it's twice as much, almost twice as much as most of the districts in Central Texas.
Hi, I'm Victoria Vindelli, and my daughter goes to Boone, and we're new to Austin, so I'm asked some pretty simple questions, if you could just help me with the budget here. But this is new to me. What I want to know, and I think what my main concern has caught me off guard, is that our teachers haven't had any raise in 2 years, and there's that freezing lock. If I understood correctly, that is built, we can't increase their wages because of the way the legislation, or is it just strictly funding?
Right. It's no, we can increase our salaries to any level we want to increase them. It's about having enough revenue to cover those increases, and that's something that we would have to go in part to our taxpayers to in what we call a tax ratification election to be able to sustain in the out years. So we could increase it. It's not limited by state statute.
Does AIC not have the control to reduce expenditures in other areas to increase salaries without going to the tax voters?
That we can, and we have. So for the last, our austerity planning alone saved us 27.
Well, you can see the pie chart that I put up, 77 million over 3 years. So we've been cutting 77 million out of our expenditure base as a result of the cuts that we've had to implement over the last 3 years.
So, but from last year to this year, our increase in expenditures is going to go up 3%. So if we have an increase in expenditures of 3%,
that's the gross budget. So when you look at the general fund is what we're primarily talking about, is where the major stress on the budget is, and that's just over I think it's 1.2%.
So the salaries for AIC teachers are paid out of the general fund?
Yes.
It is not considered. So then my second part of the question is, explain to me what the debt service is. I'm not quite understanding why such an increase over last year to this year. Did a bond go into effect?
Right, well, so the Austin taxpayers authorized a 2004 bond package as well as a 2008 bond. And so as those projects are finished, we have to pay out the debt service associated with those, the borrowing costs associated with financing those projects. So as more and more projects become completed, the more we owe on those loans that finance those projects. So technically, the state sees it as the debt service. We don't have to go back to the voters since you already authorized those bond packages. And I think the first bond package was around $350 million or so, and the second one was around closer to $400 million or so. So as we finish those projects, we have to pay the loans that finance those projects. That's the debt service. So it increases every year. Some of our loans fall off, others fall on. So that's why it increases on an annual basis. Okay.
Is there a like a 5-year projection or a multi-year projection that we can see?
Absolutely.
Out? Where would we find that at?
It's on our district website. Okay. It's in most of our budget schedules. If you look at our current year budget, our official budget, for FY 2012, you can see some detailed debt schedules as well as schedules for food service as well as the general fund budget. You can see school level budget detail, departmental budget detail, all of which is included in some of those budget schedules and what we call our official budget for 2012.
Okay. All right. Last question. Sorry. Food service. Is that subsidized? Does AIC subsidize that for the subsidization of the food that you provide in the schools?
No, our food service budget breaks even.
Okay.
This is one of the first few districts I've worked in where our food cost is not subsidized by the general fund.
Okay.
So between federal subsidies as well as our a la carte services revenue, it's a self-sustaining fund.
Now, if you have a 2.3 increase over last year, is that because you're anticipating higher food costs, or are you building in higher attendance?
It's food cost. I mean, it's inflationary factors. The cost of food goes up, but it's self-sustaining. So it doesn't mean that I have to appropriate any general fund revenue to support that.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Merritt, and I have a question about one of the preliminary budgets, in that the new program designed for the ALC, initially it had a savings of $748,000, and I wanted to know how you came up with that savings.
The initial projection for the redesign of ACES ALC included the assumption that we would partner with an alternative provider that would allow us to sort of implement more cost-effective strategies to deliver services to those populations of kids. At the same time, we would implement a decentralized model that would allow us to take care of discretionary placements at local campuses. We were sort of looking at sort of a blended model between the two. And as we moved down the course of transitioning to this new structure, we realized that we needed to have more time to vet and evaluate those potential providers. And we may want to consider multiple providers considering the needs of some of those students as it relates to the discretionary placement. So we needed some additional time to make sure that the providers met our rigorous criteria. So we're not going to be able to realize a lot of the savings that we initially anticipated for that restructuring redesign program. So while we're going through that transition, we're really implementing 3 models at once. We're maintaining sort of a core to satisfy our mandatory our statutory required programming that requires a complement of staff that has to exist in case that happens. So we can't really cut costs or cut services there because we have to provide that infrastructure. And then we're trying to implement the site-based model so that we can begin to have improved services at local campuses to support the sort of new redesign. And we're sort of phasing in as we vet potential new providers. So we realized that we couldn't realize that initial savings for 12-13, but we may be able to fully realize it for 13-14 once we have all the models in place and we have a provider where we believe we can get a more cost-effective model.
Thank you. And I guess a big concern that's in the community, as far as especially the campuses that have a larger number of discretionary placements, is a concern that we really want to make sure that the teachers on those campuses are not going to end up taking on more of a burden. Because right now our teachers are doing the best they can with cut resource. I mean, we can't ask any more from them. We're already asking way too much. And I think they need a raise also. But so just, that's a big concern in the community, is when you change this model, please do not add this. The whole itinerant teacher thing is a little scary to me, because I look at it and say, you know, you're supposed to serve all the 3 vertical, you've got 3 different cost centers, or what the groups, but basically it seems like you may not have enough teachers and you're going to put the burden on the campuses, and I really hope that doesn't happen.
That's definitely not the intent. A lot of the monies where we had to pull it back is going to be spent on school-based resources, not just the itinerant teachers, but we have an RTI program, response to intervention. We have an SEL programming that we're sort of blending together to pull together a comprehensive model to support schools. We also have various pilots that are happening. I know we're doing a pilot at Crockett for sustained mental health services. So if that's, we're planning on extrapolating and rolling that out at an increased level depending upon what the results. So the intent is not to leave schools strapped. We are actually trying to combine and leverage harness all our resources to build a more comprehensive program where the school has actual access to the services. So, you know, the redesign is not predicated upon putting the burden to the local campuses. We're trying to build that infrastructure to support them more effectively at the local campus.
And that's one of the reasons why we would have loved to have the savings, but we don't think that it's worth it to try to force the savings and leave any schools in a lurch around how to do the programming appropriately. So we spend a lot of time with our principals, our child study teams, any other experts that we have in the district around social and emotional learning, positive behavior supports, and those sorts of things to figure out the right design. And and at the end of the day, we were like, we absolutely should not rush this. But we do know this, right? We have a challenge with disproportionality. And after, working with some of our Austin local researchers who were able to control for race and socioeconomics, and we were finding that just disproportionality was really becoming a huge issue for us around discretionary removals. And it wasn't so much about the child's behavior, it was a little bit about the adult engagement around the child's issue. So we want to solve the right problem, right? We want to solve the right problem. And I don't really feel like we've got our hands around that just yet. So I anticipate that, like she said, we're going to have a couple of things that we need to work through. I don't anticipate savings around it, and I really don't think that we should rush into a partnership with someone that basically doesn't. I mean, what we're trying to do is actually teach the child the right skills to be able to be a better student, so that the teacher can do a better job. I mean, it's got to be a two-way street, and we know that we have students that they're not getting it from home, they're not getting it reinforced by their peers, and they really don't have, I mean, we're seeing kids go back into these alternative settings several times in a school year and every year in their school life, and that's just torturous as they move all around the system. So we really need to help the kid, and some need more help, some need less help, and we're really trying to figure out what's the amount that need that level of support. Some honestly need mental health services. That's not something we do as teachers. It's just not what we're skilled to do. And our ALC program, that's not really what it's set up to do either. So we're really trying to understand the amount of children we have at certain levels and what's the right support to them. And we don't, you're right, but we don't want to make that mistake either, and we have, that's not our intent, and that's why you won't see savings in 12-13.
Okay, so does that mean that you're kind of stepping back now and
we're
reevaluating and figuring out exactly how to implement?
We are reevaluating, but we know we can't continue with the status quo. I mean, because they're missing a lot of school, they're bringing down the test scores in school, we're seeing kids drop out, it's not, it's pulling on our graduation rate. We know we have to fix it. It can't be the status quo of last year. It's got to be something better, but I don't know how far I can get into it. And I know already it's not going to be far enough to have savings. Now, maybe later we will, but for next school year, we don't think so. And we do believe it's more important to put the resources in the schools so that they aren't overburdened by, some extra high need. And until we have it figured out, it's not going to be in the bucket of cost savings, that's for sure.
Well, and that, I guess, is really the question. It didn't seem like you should have cost savings, or it'd be very difficult to realize those types of cost savings because you still have to service the same number of students. Whether they're in discretionary removal, they are still getting some specialized services because they're not in their normal classes.
Fair enough. And we know we haven't arrived yet. We haven't figured this one out just yet.
My name's Renee Hamilton, and my kids attend AISD. And when I went to AISD, it seemed pretty cut and dry. Now everything's kind of crazy. Basically, what I want to know is if we're rich in the district and you tax people to get more money, aren't they taking more money from our district? Because we seem like we're getting more in here. I mean,
So the first thing I just want to clarify is that we're not a rich district. We're
what
a
is the
property
Robin Hood?
wealthy
Okay.
city. That's the difference,
Okay.
and that's how the state looks at us. They could care less about the district. They're looking at our properties
Okay.
in Austin as a city. And then, but our district is majority high poverty. You know, we have, large numbers of special education students,
63%
language learners. So our need, we are a majority low socioeconomic district that has high needs, and we're growing in numbers. We're still getting bigger as a system. So the second part of what you said is accurate, if I understand it correctly, so I'm gonna check for understanding. But basically what it means is, because of recapture, if we raise our taxes, they do get a piece of that.
they get more.
They will get more recapture because they get to keep what we already have been giving, and it means that we'll be giving more to the state. And that is how the law works.
Okay, so instead of putting it in the tax form where it makes it seem like we have more money, isn't there a way around it? Like, if each district needs something, I mean, do you have a website to say, okay, this school requires this school requires that? And as a community, we could come together and help our schools get to the level that they need to get our kids, what they need to move on, instead of dropping out and doing all those things that we do, instead of them thinking, oh, well, they're rich, they're gonna keep getting rich because Austin keeps getting bigger and bigger, but we want to help our kids now. But we don't want them to take what we're trying to give. There's no way around that?
Well, we're doing a couple of things. We're in a lawsuit with the state. I mean, we filed a lawsuit with a bunch of other districts to challenge the state in what they're doing. We know that the concept of recapture is kind of lower in their interest in giving us any relief in that, because it means that all those other legislators have to go home to their districts and say, we're taking money away. So in order of what we're doing is we're trying to really attack would you argue it's called like the funding formula? I mean, that's kind of the angle that we're going on to talk about fairness in how much we're spending per pupil in Texas, and allowing Austin not to be brought down, but that everybody gets brought up, and then we all get a fair amount on what it takes to educate kids. And while I agree with you, and our schools have tons of lists of needs, and when we do the budget, they bring them all forward. They all say, we all need counselors at the elementary level. That's something that we did, and we still pay for it. They'll say things like full day pre-K is really important, so we do that and we pay for it. So there are lots of things, and lots of little things like, we'd like
this is money that's coming from what you're collecting, right? But what I'm talking about is, as a community, things that people need, like teachers need paper, teachers need pencils, teachers need, this, that, or the other, that is coming out of their pocket. How can we as a community get together for our personal school districts where our kids go and help our kids keep going without the state or somebody taking our money?
Well, I don't know if we can fix the state taking our money part,
but
what I
I'm
will
saying
say is I love what you're saying is what, we love to hear. And one of the things, here's just a small thing that we're doing, but we have a school district foundation that has kind of been dormant for the last several years. And so that's something a school district foundation can do. And I just watched, did anybody see that article in the paper where the Eanes School District Foundation raised $1.2 million to support schools? Some of those kinds of organizations actually help us pay, or help districts pay for salaries in schools. So there's lots of different things we could do, including like that little short list. One thing that we did with our regional funders and our Office of Innovation and Development helped shape this idea, but we did what we call classroom grants, right? So we set up grants where we could get $500 into a classroom paid by an external partner to help teachers get things that are important for their particular classroom and what they're offering. So we've really been trying to step that up with our partnership work and really trying to come up with a comprehensive strategy where we can get to individuals in Austin that might be willing to help support individual schools. And so, but putting in that infrastructure, I can tell you, he's also the chair of the United Way Board, but like Kevin Cole and your superintendent and a bunch of other Austinites, and we're all trying to get that momentum going to think through that, to do what you just described. But I think it's a really smart idea. I think it's those kinds of things that will help, you know, especially for teachers, show them that we may not be able to solve a $150 million problem, right, which is what Senate Bill 1 has for us, but we can show them that we really care and that we're there to support them even in some smaller chunks, and I think that that's an important thing to do.
And we are working on setting that. The infrastructure is coming very soon. We're working with the Austin Community Foundation to set up the collections, and so
it's going to be per individual school?
We're going to
be
do
able
both.
to do it.
We're
We'll try to
doing
do
both.
both. We'll try to do it like for the district. We'll try to do it for individual schools, and then we need to think about, you know, there's some schools that, you know, like Bowie's ginormous and it's got, you know, tons of kids and tons of families. There are other schools that are a lot smaller, and so we're trying to figure out ways to address, you know, inequities that might emerge, and how do we support the other schools if they don't have large parent populations, and so on. So it's a lot to think through, but we're 100% with you on the concept.
Okay. Well, one last question. The bonds that we vote on when we say yes, so that basically doesn't come out of tax money?
It does come
It
out of tax
does,
money.
but it doesn't come out of this fund. It's a separate bucket of money. I can't use that money to take care of our general fund.
So when she's saying we're in the negative, that just means it went over cost?
So there's two, remember I told you there's two tax rates, the INS tax rate and the M&O tax rate. So the M&O tax rate is associated with your general fund, which is where we talk about the financial pressures, where we're going into fund balance.
Okay.
We're still going, on the debt service, we are going into fund balance, but it's not an issue on debt service because we can raise the tax rate on debt. By law, we're required to raise the tax rate on debt service to cover enough to cover your loan payments. So, because the voters have already authorized that expenditure when you said yes to those bond projects.
Okay.
So it's not a pressure.
As Dr. Karstafen said in the introduction, I'm going to start at the high level where we talk about the strategic plan and board priorities and show how those connect to the facility master planning and annual updated priorities that turn into AAFRs. So in addition to that, I'll also be covering the community engagement process for AAFR development. So this first graphic just shows the overall large framework. You have it in your handout there, but if you look at the top left corner there, it shows the strategic plan and the board priorities. And then those go into the Venn diagram there, where you have academics and operations. So the circle on the left is the academics portion, where you look at programs that would enhance our portfolio, that are research-based, and fit within the context of the strategic plan's goals. And then on the right, you have the operations side, where you look at infrastructure capacity, identify the finances to support these proposed programs. Where there's a good match where it overlaps in the middle, then that could become a potential annual academic and facility recommendation. And going down, if it is approved as an AAFR, then it becomes a part of the annual budget process that Nicole covered earlier, or if it requires significant infrastructure upgrade, a major renovation, buying a new building, or purchasing land, then it could be referred over to the Citizens Bond Advisory Committee for possible inclusion in the scope of the next bond election. So as you see on the second bullet there, the initial planning process is underway, and the Board of Trustees was briefed at a March 19th dialogue. Going further, on April 2nd, the board was updated on the facility master planning process and how we're moving forward with that and how it also aligns with the strategic plan. This monster here is the timeline that is approved as part of the Facility Master Plan framework. And it's actually an 18-month process from start to finish. And again, it's about community engagement, and it identifies the month-by-month actions that the administration is to conduct as you move forward. The enlarged area, February through May, is where we are now in relationship to the 13-14 AAFRs. And as you can see in your handout, it identifies appointing, various committees and multiple actions. Some of those committees are the Citizens Bond Advisory Committee and the Boundary Advisory Committee. And these committees and the community engagement process, they will inform what actually becomes an AAFR and also the facility long-range master plan that is currently being developed. Now we're getting into the potential AAFRs. There are 11 of them. This is the first slide. They're going to be on this slide and the next one. This will probably change before it's all over. We had a much larger list that shrank down and shrank some more last year. So what we eventually end up will be based upon the community engagement process, what we can afford, and advice from the advisory bodies to the superintendent. The final decision will be made in December of this year for the 13-14 academic year. This potential list has been vetted with the academics, senior cabinet, and also discussed with the board. Okay, these are the other 5. A work group is tasked with researching each proposed AFR and obtaining feedback. So there are 11 total. 2 single-sex middle schools with 1 attendance area in District 1, and the schools being considered are Garcia and Pierce Middle Schools. The goal of this program is to ensure that all students reach grade level performance, benchmarks in reading, writing, math, and science, that they graduate on time with college-ready skills, and enroll in post-secondary academic programs that put them on the road to a successful career. Research supports that using best practices for gender-specific instruction may help us be more successful in teaching to boys and girls strengths. The next one is a school for young men with a possible funder. This is also aimed towards grades 6 through 8. A feasibility study is underway, and the goals are the same as for the 2 schools with the combined attendance zone. One that is mentioned here is that it also looks at a road to successful vocational, technical, or professional career. And they were speaking about foundations a little earlier. The district is going to seek to establish a School for Young Men foundation to support teacher professional development, technology training, summer programs, community partnerships, and programs that promote college preparation, leadership, and general wellness. $32 million was approved in the 2008 bond for the purchase of land only for a South High School. Right now, the administration and the Board of Trustees are having discussions to determine what type of academic programming would go into that South High School. Is it going to be a comprehensive academic program, or is it going to be a more specialized program? The decision on academic programming will determine the size and possibly the location of the site to be selected. And if you're interested in what that site selection process is, it's a part of the approved F&P framework. Career and technical education, and the consideration here is to look at parity, and by parity we mean equal access to programs. And the way it's being considered is you can look at either regional hubs, which would be a large career and tech site in the north, south, or east and west, or you could look at possibly upgrading individual locations at the schools. Based on the decisions from this working group that's looking into this, it'll determine the level of facility improvements that are going to be needed to support this program. And over numerous meetings last year, the community expressed a desire for continuation of dual language programming once the students that that were in that program left elementary school. So this AFR focuses on the middle years program and possibly expanding to that level and maybe adding additional languages as well. The 12-13 AAFRs consisted of adding 3 additional Spanish dual language programs and 1 Chinese dual language program at the elementary level. Vertical teams or campuses can apply for adding these programs as a 13-14 AAFR. This program is an approved 12-13 AAFR, but now we're looking at the follow-on years. It's going to go into both Lanier and Travis, and if it's successful, AISD has the option to extend the contract with Responsive Education Solutions. And this is a recovery program for students who have dropped out or are at risk of dropping out. Students can recover credits and also accelerate credit accrual and receive high-dosage tutoring in math and other areas of need. Eastside Memorial Vertical Team, the key strategies being suggested here are addressing human capital needs, a continuation of high-dosage tutoring programs at Eastside Memorial High School, Martin Middle School, Go Valley Elementary School, and expanding high-dosage tutoring to serve Ortega Elementary School. We're also looking at identifying resources to support the continuation and expansion of the science, technology, engineering, and math program activities. A facility assessment will be conducted to see the level of renovations needed to support this academic plan. Travis Heights Elementary School has expressed a desire to become an in-district community charter school. So they apply for this, and other AISD schools interested in proceeding or implementing an in-district charter can apply as well for consideration by the administration and the Board of Trustees. And the Travis Heights Elementary School facility will remain in the AISD inventory, and those students will continue on in their current attendance tracking pattern. And one thing that the Facility Master Plan framework does is that it gives us flexibility to make annual adjustments. And so based on student outcomes, programs can be developed to meet identified student needs and goals of the strategic plan, and those adjustments will be informed by academic achievement test results, school rating data for No Child Left Behind, and demographic data such as capacity. So the district is committed to upgrading its facilities, especially when you look at other districts in the area. We have done some upgrades to Burger, House Park, and Nelson Stadiums, but we also need to look at dressing rooms and campus practice areas across the district. And some of these locker rooms in our older facilities require corrective action to ensure that we have a safe and healthy environment. And if this moves forward, it would probably require long-term capital investment and would be referred over to the Citizens Bond Advisory Committee. And lastly, we have the Kennedy Center out of Washington, D.C., conducting a study comparing AISD fine arts to other best practices implemented across the nation. And that framework in the study includes looking at operations and facility needs, and that too could require support of a long-term future bond.
My name is Erin Zavaleta, and I understand after speaking that a lot of the big problem with closing this gap is because no matter where we raise the money, it tends to be pulled back into the recapture, correct? But what I'm also hearing is that private funds are not subject to that. So rather than spend the money on hiring a lawyer to sue the state, which we may not see the benefits of for years to come, if we see it at all, incurring huge legal fees, why don't we reallocate that money to some sort of a private organization that does fundraising, so that they can go to corporations and they can go to individuals and raise that capital that's not subject to recapture.
Fair enough, but we do believe we have to do both. The difference in the lawsuit is the difference between $150 to $200 million, which we don't think we can do with private funders and
not
have
even with corporations like Dell and all of those big.
They give already.
Yeah.
I mean, just so you know, like just about every large corporation or organization, they have foundations and they give to the districts all over the state and the nation. It's not just a local foundation. So they do give, they don't give at that level. And that's pretty common unless you're, you know, even with the Gates Foundation, which is the biggest, it's like a uber federal government. They really don't do that kind of funding at that level as well. But we do believe we have to do both. And by the way, the cost, I mean, our cost for the legal piece of the lawsuit is far smaller in the early investment than it is on the payout should we be successful. And at the same time, we do agree with you on making sure that we can maximize to the best of our ability private funders, because you're right, it's not subject to recapture, and to the extent that we can do 5 million, 10 million, or something at that level, it would be great. But just so that you know, I mean, our Innovation and Development Office, if I have the numbers correctly, over the last year or so, I think it was close to $30 million when we're doing federal and state grants and those kinds of things, and those things are not subject to recapture either. So we really try to maximize those venues as well. So it's not just private funders, it's also the other grantors.
Thank you very much. That was very clearly, you answered my question very well.
Thank you.
The other question that I had was, it keeps being reiterated that the staff salaries have been frozen for several years. And
For 2.
I'm sorry, for 2 years. And I was just wondering if that also included administrative salaries as well.
Yeah, that's everybody.
Everybody?
You know, transportation, anybody who's on staff in AISD, so everybody's salary has been frozen. But I mean, but teachers are really, you know, at the heart of what we do, and we want to ensure that, you know, that they, I mean, you know, that they are as fairly compensated, because it is such a competitive industry to be in this region.
I understand. And actually, I did have one more, and since I have the mic, I'm going to go ahead and ask.
Sure.
I was there for a lot of the redistricting and border boundary line change meetings, and I understand that we hired an out-of-state consultant to draw up the plans to do all of that. Have we seen any return on that
Sorry,
investment?
for what though? What was it?
When we went to all of the big, you know, very heated discussions, I remember we were all there, and one of the gyms when we were discussing closing Zilker and O. Henry. And all of
Yes,
those.
you are talking about facility master planning. Yes.
And all of those things still have not come to fruition because we can't reach agreement. And so I guess I was just wondering, are we going to see any return on that investment for hiring a consultant to do all of that?
Well, we didn't throw everything out. I mean, people did a lot of great work. So what we did get out of it is the facility master plan framework, which we are using, and we've been using it. I mean, it has been the, you know, the recipe for how we've worked our way through capital improvement and bond planning advisory committee, how we're getting to a citizens bond advisory committee, how we're getting to those 2 pages of AAFRs. I mean, it laid out the whole process. It also informed, you know, the timeline and some other things. So the only thing that we really didn't accept from some of the recommendations was the kind of the large-scale school closure approach to what had been proposed in some of the designs. But a lot of the other work we did utilize, and there was a lot of, you know, smart policy changes that needed to take place, and those are things that the board is doing, and we're working through them step by step. But they had some, you know, they did do some great work. The only part that we didn't take is the part around school closures, and you're right, we haven't quite come to agreement about that.
Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
Because from the outside perspective, you know, we're kind of going, okay, what happened? What, you know, where are we going with all this? So thank you.
Could you help me understand what takes so long to purchase the land that we approved in 2008? Because we did it because we knew that our elementary schools and middle schools out in South Austin are just busting at the seams. Bowie is ginormous, as you said, and yet we still don't have another high school, and it's looking like my second child might not even make it into that high school at this pace. And then, you know, comprehensive, does that mean a high school like Bowie? And then specialty school, what does that mean? What are the 2 differences in these types of schools?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that go into the different bond programs. So another one that's taken a long time is the Performing Arts Center, the PAC. I mean, you may have read about that too. So we have at North Central overcrowding. We had some bond dollars to do another elementary school. So there are a lot of things that come into play. First is really, I mean, most of the time it's really dependent on what's happening in the community and what's available for purchase and for consideration. So we had a tough time finding land in North Central Austin, for example. You know, down here, it's more about many different things, like what land is available, when are we looking at enrollment numbers, and when do the enrollment numbers sort of justify the trigger for us to get started. We know that we're growing, right? We don't always know exactly where the growth is happening. And also down here in South Austin, there's a lot of pressure around impervious cover and can you help me on this? The protection. Y'all know better than I do.
Yes.
The aquifer and all that. So you've got some other interesting issues down here. So those things do tend to slow us up. But also there's been the second part, which is the question you asked, the difference between like comprehensive and specialty, and also the debate around boundaries, right? So how much of boundary adjustment should we do to do a better distribution of students in available space in other high schools? And then, you know, trying to understand for the growth, do we need a comprehensive high school? And by that, we do mean a Bowie, an Austin High, an Anderson-type school, larger, with lots of big, you know, programming. Or are we talking about something that could be more specialized? I'm sorry?
Like technology.
Yeah, it could be a school around career and technical ed that does 2 or 3 things, but doesn't have a full football team and a bunch of extra electives. It could be structured more like a LASA, or, I mean, there's just so many different things you could do.
Okay, but I'm just going to say that whenever I voted for the bond, I voted for another comprehensive high school in South Austin so that our children wouldn't be busting at the seams in the classrooms. And, you know, I think y'all do an excellent job. It just seems like it takes forever. And I get the whole aquifer thing. I get all of that. But I just wish that we would kind of move away a little bit from all these specialty schools and let's accommodate the kids who are here who are just, I mean, what are we going to do, put in 100 more portables? I mean, because we're just growing. Circle C area is huge and not slowing down. They're building another neighborhood on the other side of 45. We've got to get a school that we approved the land for in 2008. And that's, I mean, I think y'all do an excellent job. I'm not complaining with you. Just the frustration of the system itself moves extremely slowly.
Right, and we've had a few slow projects, yes.
Hi, my name is Luke Miskevich. I'm a parent of a Metz Elementary student and appreciate your time tonight. Pleased to see the proposed AFR regarding Eastside Memorial Vertical Team. And I was just hoping you could spend a couple minutes and help me understand really, you know, are these a series of kind of incremental changes, or are you really getting at kind of some fundamental changes in programming here within the EMVT, which of course is made up of 8 elementary schools, a middle school and a high school. And then also, how will that kind of tie into the AFR that you passed and board passed in December to replace Allen and Eastside with the charter schools operated by IDEA?
So on all these AFRs that we're talking about, we're at the embryonic stages. I mean, you may be aware that we're working with Austin Voices and some other local community groups to help us, garner all the ideas and thoughts that people have about how we could go about this that could be more comprehensive or not. Right now we don't know how it would all turn out. And this is basically what it was like last year too, like a lot of talk about stuff and really trying to change it from talk into something tangible that we can write up and understand and start costing out and understanding the implications of it. So even, pick any of them that were listed. Some are a little more developed than others. So like the Moody Foundation, that's the potential partner for a boys' school. They've been working with us for over a year. I think it's almost a year and a half now. So that feels like we've got more meat to it, whereas other things that have just started are just at the beginning. So can't quite answer that one. I think it'll come out of those existing conversations, and how that all works together with some of the other decisions is part of what we have to consider, but don't have answers for that at this time.
Okay, so I mean, is there one kind of overwhelming objective, I guess, that are pulling these different ideas that are, you know, in the very embryonic stages, as you said? I mean, what do you want to accomplish with this AFR within the Eastside Memorial Vertical?
Well, I mean, for us, what we talk about at the end of the day, I think it's what every parent prays for, is that their kid graduates, they graduate on time, that they got a quality education, that your zip code isn't determining the quality of the experience of the school in your neighborhood, that you have good neighborhood schools that you're not worried about, and that if you do decide to transfer or make another choice, it really is about an academic program. Like, I really have a budding, opera singer, and I really think that they need to be at McCallum, although I live in the Lanier attendance area. I mean, those are the kinds of, we want parents like struggling between the two great choices, not feeling like they need to flee or desperately find another place for their kids. So I think at the end of the day, for any vertical team, it's ensuring that kids have a great, wonderful experience as early as pre-K, they graduate on time, that they're ready for college, career, and life, and that with whatever they do, that they're just a great learner, and if they're working, they can learn the skills for their jobs, and if they go to college, they can be successful in college.
Two questions from me. So my first question, I think Mr. Fryer mentioned that in the AAFR process, this list would be whittled down. Okay. And I'm curious to know if that South High School land-only program would remain on the list because it was approved as part of a bond package.
Well, of course, what's approved in the bond package is what we're going to do. I mean, we are going to buy land. You know you're growing. We know we have needs. Where it goes, what it looks like, I mean, that's stuff we have to figure out. So what I would anticipate, just like that, and was that the 2004 bond for the North Central Elementary? 2004?
And then we have an 8.
And then we have the 8. So like those two that we had up there in North Central, those stayed up on when we shortened the list, those stayed at the very top because we've already made a commitment to our voters and you have a need. So I don't know when, but I know that we've got to get that done.
Okay, yeah, so relative to that, I think you said that there's more information about the process in the FMP framework. Can I find that on the AISD website?
Yes, it is.
What that means? Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to austinisd.org, I think it's /FMP, there are all those documents.
Right. And then the other thing is just a comment on this career and technical education. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you addressing this because I think we do a disservice to our kids when we say we expect every one of them to go to college. It's not realistic, and we ought to give them some options. So thank you for addressing that.
And that's a tough one. I'm not sure we'll get a lot of agreement on that one too, because some high schools have really great programming built into the high school, yes, but we can't afford to do that at every high school. Right. So how do we figure out what's the best design? Are we hubbing it? Are we? I mean, who knows? But that's one that's going to be a tough nut to crack. And but I agree with you. I think. It's, have the great academic skills and then also get some career skills if you want to delay your college experience or, you may choose not to go in the end at all, but that we do both really well.
Regarding the single-gender middle schools, a couple of questions. Have we surveyed that attendance zone for interest in a single-gender school? And if so, what is the plan for those who opt out? And what percentage will be allowed to opt out?
So there are two kinds of models on this single gender piece. One is, it would be, the only way that I can describe it, the design that's being considered with the Moody Foundation that we're exploring is one that's like Ann Richards. It would be a brother school to the sister school of Ann Richards. So I think everybody sort of has a sense of how that works. That's one model we're exploring. The other model is the only area where we believe we have two middle schools that are close enough to each other where you could combine the attendance areas and have them in their neighborhoods, but in two different sites. So as far as the first one with the Moody Foundation and the general concept of single gender education, we did that. I think you were asking what benefit did we get out of the facility master planning folks out of Ohio. That was one thing that they did do. They surveyed around some specific programming, and we do have those survey results, and that's why we considered that as a potential annual academic and facility recommendation, because there was interest. But there's not interest. I guess I should say the survey results showed that people supported the concept across Austin, but there was only one community that overwhelmingly supported it as a program design, and that was in East Austin around District 1. And that's why if we don't do, we can look at the two designs, and that's why Trustee Bradley in District 1 started talking about, well, if there's so much interest in that in our school community, do we want to do something specialized for us that might be a little different to what might get funded in the other design? So that's where we saw the interest. And now what we're trying to sort out is it possible? Is it really sustainable? Can you really do it? And we've been going family to family to family, trying to understand what the interest would be and would people really send their kids to that school. Now, we don't have the answers to that just yet. It's been a mixed bag, and the data is showing, at least in my opinion, that there is a difference between English-speaking families and Spanish-speaking families. There's far more interest and support in the boys' school, girls' school for Spanish-speaking families, and they're far more maybes, no's for English-speaking families. So we're starting to get our picture put together, and then what happens to kids, like we always do in AISD, if you do not choose, and we're putting in a specific program in a school, if you do not choose to go to that program, the district offers transportation, but we typically assign another school. So it's not just any school in AISD, it's typically the closest neighboring school of like grade levels. So in this case, it could be, Adobe or, I don't know, I gotta look at my map again, but whoever would be the closest. But thank you for your time. We really appreciate you coming out. You've been fabulous. We look forward to making the budget shape up the way that you think it needs to be.